Meet David, a software engineer who lies in bed at 11 p.m. sharp every night, desperately trying to fall asleep, only to find himself wide awake at 2 a.m. wondering why sleep won't come. It started 3 months ago when David read an article about the importance of good sleep for productivity and health. As someone who prided himself on optimizing every aspect of his life, David decided he was going to become an expert sleeper. He bought blackout curtains, a white noise machine, blue light-blocking glasses, and even a sleep tracking app that promised to analyze his sleep patterns and help him achieve the perfect night's rest. Every evening at 10:30 p.m., David would begin his carefully crafted bedtime routine. He'd dim all the lights, put his phone in airplane mode, brew chamomile tea, and do 5 minutes of deep breathing exercises he'd learned from a sleep meditation app. By 11 p.m., he'd be in bed with his eye mask on, ready to achieve the 8 hours and 15 minutes of sleep his fitness tracker recommended for optimal recovery. But something strange was happening. The harder David tried to sleep, the more elusive sleep became. He'd lie there with his eyes closed, mentally checking off his sleep hygiene practices. Room temperature is perfect, check. No caffeine after 2 p.m., check. No screens for an hour before bed, check. So why am I still awake? As minutes turned into hours, David's frustration would grow. He'd start calculating how much sleep he'd get if he fell asleep right now, then 5 minutes later, then 10 minutes later. If I fall asleep by midnight, I'll still get 7 hours. By 12:30, 6.5 hours. That's still acceptable according to the research I read. The worst part was that David used to be a pretty good sleeper. Before he started trying to optimize his sleep, he'd simply go to bed when he felt tired and usually drift off within 15 or 20 minutes. But now, armed with all his knowledge about sleep science and equipped with every possible sleep aid, he was getting the worst sleep of his adult life. His coworker Emma noticed his increasingly tired appearance during their daily stand-up meetings. Dark circles under his eyes, frequent yawning, and an unusual irritability that was unlike his normally calm demeanor. Rough night? Emma asked after David snapped at their junior developer over a minor coding issue. I don't understand it, David confessed during their coffee break. I'm doing everything right. I've read dozens of articles about sleep hygiene. I've invested in all the right equipment. I follow a perfect routine. But I'm sleeping worse now than when I didn't care about sleep at all. Emma, who had recently completed a psychology course as part of her part-time graduate program, recognized something familiar in David's description. You know, this reminds me of something we learned about called performance anxiety and ironic process theory. Have you ever heard of those? David shook his head, intrigued despite his exhaustion. Well, Emma explained, performance anxiety doesn't just apply to things like public speaking or sports. It can happen with sleep too. When you put too much pressure on yourself to achieve a specific outcome, like falling asleep quickly or getting exactly 8 hours, your brain can actually work against you. She pulled out her phone and showed David some notes from her psychology class. There's this fascinating research by Daniel Wegner about something called ironic process theory. Basically, when you try really hard not to think about something or to control an automatic process like sleep, your brain does the opposite of what you want. Emma explained how this worked. When you lie in bed thinking, I must fall asleep now, part of your brain is monitoring whether you're succeeding. But that monitoring process itself keeps you awake because it requires mental activity and alertness. It's like trying not to think about a white elephant. The act of trying not to think about it guarantees you'll think about it. David felt a flash of recognition. That's exactly what happens. I lie there telling myself to relax and fall asleep, but then I'm constantly checking whether it's working. Right. Emma continued, and sleep is what psychologists call an automatic process. It's something your body does naturally when conditions are right, but it can't be forced through conscious effort. It's like trying to will your heart to beat faster or forcing yourself to digest food more quickly. She went on to explain another concept she'd learned about called sleep effort syndrome. When people become too focused on achieving perfect sleep, they often develop what researchers call hypervigilance about sleep-related stimuli. You start paying attention to every sound, every sensation, every thought that might interfere with sleep, which paradoxically makes you more alert and less likely to fall asleep naturally. David realized this described his experience perfectly. He'd become hyper-aware of everything that might affect his sleep. The neighbor's dog barking, his partner's breathing, the slight hum of the air conditioning, even his own heartbeat. Things that never used to bother him now seemed impossibly loud and disruptive. There's also something called anticipatory anxiety, Emma added. Once you've had a few nights of poor sleep, you start dreading bedtime and worrying during the day about whether you'll be able to sleep that night. This anxiety actually primes your nervous system to be more alert when bedtime comes. David nodded vigorously. He'd started feeling anxious about sleep as early as lunchtime, calculating how many hours until bedtime and worrying whether tonight would be another sleepless night. The bedroom, which used to be a place of comfort and rest, had become associated with frustration and failure. Emma suggested that David might be experiencing what sleep researchers call conditioned arousal. If you've spent many nights lying awake in bed feeling frustrated and alert, your brain can start associating your bedroom with wakefulness rather than sleep. It's like Pavlovian conditioning, but in reverse. That evening, David decided to try a completely different approach based on what Emma had shared. Instead of his elaborate bedtime routine focused on forcing good sleep, he would practice what psychologists call paradoxical intention, deliberately trying to stay awake rather than trying to fall asleep. The technique felt counterintuitive and slightly ridiculous, but David was desperate enough to try anything. He lay in bed with his eyes open, telling himself, "I'm going to stay awake as long as possible and really notice what it feels like to be awake." He focused on the sensations of lying in bed, the feeling of his body against the mattress, the rhythm of his breathing, without any goal of falling asleep. Something remarkable happened. Without the pressure to fall asleep, David's mind began to wander naturally. He stopped monitoring his sleep progress and started simply existing in the present moment. Within 20 minutes, faster than he'd fallen asleep in months, he drifted off naturally. Encouraged by this success, David began researching the psychology of sleep more deeply. He learned about acceptance-based approaches to insomnia, which focus on reducing the struggle against sleeplessness rather than trying to force sleep to happen. He discovered that many of his sleep optimization strategies had actually been counterproductive. The sleep tracking app, for instance, was creating what researchers call orthosomnia, an obsession with achieving perfect sleep data that actually interferes with natural sleep patterns. Every morning, David would anxiously check his sleep score, and a poor score would create anxiety that affected his sleep the following night. David also learned about the concept of sleep drive, the natural biological pressure to sleep that builds up during wakefulness. He realized that by going to bed at exactly 11 p.m. every night, regardless of how tired he felt, he might sometimes be going to bed before his sleep drive was strong enough to overcome his sleep-focused anxiety. Working with these insights, David developed a new approach he privately called sleep minimalism. Instead of a complex routine designed to force good sleep, he created simple conditions that supported natural sleep without putting pressure on the outcome. He kept some of his helpful sleep hygiene practices, maintaining a cool, dark room and avoiding caffeine late in the day, but eliminated the monitoring and pressure. He put away his sleep tracking app and stopped calculating optimal bedtimes. Most importantly, he changed his relationship with being awake in bed. "If I can't sleep, that's okay," became his new mantra. "I'm resting, and rest has value even without sleep." This shift from fighting wakefulness to accepting it reduced the anxiety that had been keeping him alert. David also learned about stimulus control therapy, a technique where you only use your bed for sleep and intimacy, leaving the bedroom if you can't fall asleep within about 20 minutes. This helps maintain the association between bed and sleep rather than bed and frustrated wakefulness. On nights when sleep didn't come easily, instead of lying there trying harder, David would get up and do a quiet, boring activity in dim light until he felt genuinely sleepy. He'd read technical manuals or do gentle stretches, activities that were restful but not stimulating enough to further delay sleep. 3 weeks into his new approach, David was sleeping better than he had in months. The improvement wasn't dramatic or immediate, but it was consistent. More importantly, he'd stopped dreading bedtime and started trusting his body's natural ability to sleep when conditions were right. "The weird thing is," David told Emma during another coffee break, "I sleep better now that I care less about sleeping perfectly. When I was trying so hard to optimize my sleep, I was actually creating the conditions that make good sleep impossible." Emma smiled knowingly. That's the paradox with a lot of automatic processes. The harder you try to control them, the more they resist control. It's like trying to force yourself to be spontaneous. The effort defeats itself. David had learned what sleep researchers call the first rule of sleep. You cannot force sleep to happen through conscious effort. Sleep is something that happens to you when you create the right conditions and then get out of your own way. 6 months later, David's relationship with sleep had completely transformed. He still maintained some basic sleep hygiene practices, but they felt natural and sustainable rather than like a rigid performance he had to execute perfectly each night. Most importantly, he developed what psychologists call sleep confidence, trust in his body's ability to sleep when it needed to. His experience had taught him a valuable lesson that extended beyond sleep. Many things we try to optimize through conscious effort, creativity, happiness, confidence, and yes, sleep, often work better when we focus on creating supportive conditions rather than forcing specific outcomes. I used to think that caring more about sleep would make me sleep better, David reflected. But I learned there's a difference between caring for your sleep and obsessing over your sleep. One supports rest, the other prevents it. David's story illustrates a fundamental principle in psychology called the law of reversed effort or backwards law. When we try too hard to achieve certain outcomes, especially those involving automatic biological or psychological processes, our effort often produces the opposite of what we want. This happens because sleep is regulated by the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of our nervous system responsible for rest and relaxation. When we're anxiously focused on achieving sleep, we activate the sympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for alertness and vigilance. These two systems work in opposition to each other. The phenomenon David experienced is remarkably common. Sleep clinics regularly see patients who develop insomnia not from poor sleep habits, but from trying too hard to sleep perfectly. Psychologists call this psychophysiological insomnia, sleeplessness caused by the anxiety and effort surrounding sleep rather than by external factors. Research shows that people with insomnia often have higher levels of cognitive arousal at bedtime, racing thoughts, worry, and self-monitoring that keep the mind active when it should be winding down. The irony is that good sleepers don't think much about sleep at all. They simply go to bed when tired and trust their body to do the rest. Understanding this paradox can be liberating for people struggling with sleep. Instead of trying harder, the solution often involves trying less, creating good basic conditions for sleep, and then trusting the natural process to unfold. Remember, these are general insights from psychology, and everyone's experience is unique. Some sleep difficulties stem from medical conditions, medications, or life circumstances that require professional attention. But for many people, the simple shift from trying to control sleep to supporting natural sleep can make a significant difference. The next time you find yourself lying awake trying to force sleep to happen, remember David's story. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your sleep is to stop trying so hard and trust your body's natural wisdom. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this little story and the insights it brought.